You ever felt like you're being watched, even when alone? The moon cast eerie shadows as I stumbled upon a nightmare, a mutilated body lying in a pool of blood behind my apartment. The air was so cold it seemed to freeze my soul. But the worst part? A blood-stained notebook lying beside the body, its pages filled with the killer's confessions. It all started with an innocent walk to clear my mind after a long day. The city usually calmed my nerves, its familiar sounds like a lullaby. But that night, something felt off. The usual city hum was replaced by an unsettling silence. My steps echoed in the dimly lit alley, each one louder than the last. Then, at the end of the alley, my eyes caught sight of something on the ground, a body. At first, I thought it was a prank, a mannequin maybe. But as I got closer, the reality hit me like a punch to the gut. The body was real, the blood was real, and the terror was all too real. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The victim, a young woman, looked like she had been through hell. Her eyes, wide open and lifeless, stared into nothingness. I forced myself to look away and focus on something else, anything else. My phone trembled as I dialed 911, my voice barely steady enough to report the crime. "There's a body in the alley behind my apartment," I whispered. Waiting for the police felt like an eternity. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the killer to return. Then I saw it, a blood-stained notebook a few feet from the body. I couldn't resist. The pages, filled with frantic scribbles, detailed a series of gruesome murders. Each entry was more horrifying than the last. This was no first-time killer. The police arrived with sirens blaring, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows on the alley walls. They secured the scene and questioned me extensively. I handed over the notebook, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd found. Days turned into weeks, and the image of that night haunted my every waking moment. I couldn't let it go. I needed to know more. I started my own investigation, poring over local news articles and police reports. I visited the library, searching through old newspapers and public records. One name kept appearing, an elusive figure known only as the Butcher. The murders spanned over a decade, each victim linked by the same brutal method. The city was gripped with fear, and the police seemed no closer to catching the killer. My obsession grew, and I found myself retracing the steps of each crime. On a cold, rainy night, I found myself in another forgotten alley, much like the one where it all began. Rain soaked through my clothes, each drop a reminder of my obsession. I turned a corner and froze. Under a flickering street lamp stood the figure I had seen in every crime scene photo. My heart pounded as he turned to face me, a sinister smile spreading across his face. His appearance was ordinary, almost forgettable. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, told a different story. "You've been following my work, haven't you?" His voice was a chilling whisper, echoing in the empty alley. I reached for my phone, but he was faster. In a flash, he was upon me, and I felt a sharp pain in my side. "I admire your persistence, but you should have stayed away." My vision blurred as I collapsed to the ground. The world darkened around me, and the last thing I heard was his haunting laugh. When I woke up in the hospital, the police were there, eager for answers. The Butcher had escaped once again, but I had given them something invaluable, a detailed description and a new lead. They questioned me for hours, piecing together every detail I could remember. Yet, as I lay there, the memory of his eyes burned into my mind. Weeks passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, every stranger seemed to follow me. My brush with death had only strengthened my resolve. The hunt for the Butcher was far from over, and I knew he was still out there, watching. I began working closely with the police, sharing my research and insights. We tracked down old witnesses, revisited crime scenes, and followed every lead, no matter how small. The Butcher's trail was cold, but not dead. We uncovered new patterns, subtle links between the victims that had previously been overlooked. Late one night, while poring over the case files, I received an anonymous tip. The caller's voice was distorted, but the message was clear: he's planning something big. Tomorrow night. The abandoned warehouse on 5th Street. My heart raced as I relayed the information to the police. They mobilized quickly, setting up surveillance and preparing for the worst. As the hours ticked by, tension filled the air. We watched the warehouse from a distance, every shadow a potential threat. Then, just before midnight, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was him, the butcher. The police moved in swiftly, surrounding the building. A tense standoff ensued, with the butcher taunting us from within. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he was captured. The relief was overwhelming, but the horror of his crimes would linger forever. As they led him away in handcuffs, he turned to me and smiled. "This isn't over," he whispered. "I'll be back." Even now, with the butcher behind bars, I can't shake the feeling that he's right. The shadows still seem to move, and I still feel his eyes on me. The hunt may be over for now, but the terror he unleashed will haunt me forever. The light flickered slightly in the train compartment, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. I was alone, the rhythmic sound of the train wheels on the tracks the only thing breaking the silence. Suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps behind me. When I turned around, I saw a man with fixed, intense eyes watching me. My heart raced. The man slowly approached, his features hidden in the shadows. His presence felt out of place, as if he didn't belong there. The sound of the howling wind outside and the smell of oil and metal heightened the sense of unease. I had just boarded the night train to return home after a long business trip. The car was almost empty, except for a few sleeping people. I settled into my seat, trying to relax, but a sense of discomfort enveloped me. The distant sound of laughter and conversations from the adjacent cabins seemed muffled, almost unreal. I didn't know why, but I felt something was wrong. I was a young businessman, always busy with my responsibilities, and this trip had been especially exhausting. In the last meeting, I had a heated argument with a colleague that resulted in his dismissal. Since then, I couldn't shake off a strange feeling, as if something terrible was about to happen. All I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and rest. However, the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me alone. As the train moved through the darkness, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. I discreetly looked around and noticed a man sitting a few seats behind, staring at me intently. He had a penetrating look, and his eyes seemed to follow my every move. Feeling uneasy, I got up to go to the bathroom, hoping the discomfort would pass. In the bathroom, I washed my face and tried to calm down. The broken mirror reflected my tense expression. I heard a sound of something dragging outside. When I opened the door, the corridor was empty, but I felt a chill run down my spine. I returned to my seat, but the man was still there, now closer. I began to notice more details about his appearance. He wore an old, time-worn suit, and his face, pale and angular, looked almost sculpted. His eyes, however, were the most disturbing. They were eyes that seemed to have seen unimaginable things, filled with a deep sadness. There was something profoundly unsettling about his presence, something that stirred my soul. I tried to ignore him, but the feeling of danger grew. Back in my seat, I noticed the man had disappeared. Relieved, I tried to sleep, but a strange noise woke me up. The man was standing next to my seat, smiling in a disturbing way. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The man leaned in and whispered, "I know who you are and what you did." I tasted metallic blood in my mouth and realized there was no escape. The train finally arrived at the station, and I ran to get off the car. I looked back and saw the man standing at the door, watching me leave. When I reached the platform, I smelled a familiar scent in the air, the same perfume my late wife used to wear. I looked around, but there was no one. The train left, taking the stranger with it, but I knew that encounter would haunt me forever. As I walked along the platform, my phone vibrated. A notification from a local journal news site appeared. Former employee fired for serious crimes mysteriously disappears. A chill ran down my spine as the pieces began to fall into place. Have you ever felt the terror of being hunted in your own home? The whispers of intruders echoed around me as I hid, clutching the kitchen knife, my heart pounding in the suffocating darkness. I never thought the night would end like this, with my family's safety hanging by a thread. The rain tapped gently against the windows as we settled into our suburban home in Greenwich, Connecticut. My wife, Sarah, tucked our daughter, Emily, into bed while I went through my nightly ritual of locking doors and checking windows, a habit from our city days. The house was peaceful, a deceptive calm before the storm. The soft glow of the living room lamp cast long shadows on the walls, and the sound of Sarah reading a bedtime story to Emily filled the air with a sense of normalcy and comfort. As I walked through the dimly lit hallway, I noticed something odd. A window in the living room was slightly ajar. I distinctly remembered closing it. Puzzled, I approached it, only to find muddy footprints on the carpet beneath it. My heart began to race as I realized someone had been inside. The musty smell of damp earth filled my nostrils, intensifying my anxiety. I quickly made my way to Sarah, trying to keep calm so as not to alarm her or Emily. "Stay in Emily's room," I whispered urgently. "I think someone might be in the house." Her eyes widened in fear, but she nodded and quietly closed the door behind her. I grabbed the kitchen knife and my phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. As I explained the situation to the dispatcher, I heard a faint creaking sound from upstairs. My blood ran cold. There were footsteps above us. The dispatcher assured me help was on the way, but I knew it would take time for the police to arrive. I moved cautiously towards the stairs, the knife feeling both reassuring and utterly inadequate. The house was eerily silent except for the soft patter of rain against the windows and the occasional creak of old wood. Each step I took seemed to echo loudly, betraying my presence. The air felt thick with tension, every breath a labor. As I reached the top of the stairs, I could hear muffled voices. They were whispering, but the words were indistinct. I crept closer to Emily's room, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see a faint light under the door, which meant Sarah had left the lamp on, probably to comfort Emily. The whispers grew louder as I approached our bedroom door, slightly ajar. I peered through the crack and saw two figures dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by masks. They were rifling through our drawers, seemingly searching for something specific. One of them held a small, glowing device, a tablet of some sort, that seemed to be guiding them. A surge of fear and anger coursed through me. These intruders knew everything about us, our home, our routines. My grip on the knife tightened as I debated my next move. Suddenly, one of them looked up, his eyes locking with mine through the door's crack. Time seemed to freeze. His expression shifted from surprise to malice. The shadows seemed to close in, suffocating me as the realization of our danger sank in. Before I could react, he lunged towards the door. I slammed it shut, throwing my weight against it as he tried to force it open. "Sarah, call 911 again. Tell them to hurry," I shouted. The door rattled violently as the intruder pounded on it, but I held firm. From behind me, I heard a soft click, Emily's door opening. I turned to see Sarah peeking out, her face pale with terror. "Get back inside," I hissed, but it was too late. The other intruder had heard her and was now heading towards Emily's room. With a desperate yell, I abandoned the door and charged at him. We collided in the hallway, and the knife slipped from my hand. We grappled on the floor, his strength overwhelming me. In the chaos, I managed to grab a nearby lamp and smashed it against his head. He collapsed, unconscious. The first intruder, now free from the door, rushed at me. I braced myself for another struggle, but suddenly the house was flooded with bright lights. The sound of sirens filled the air, and I heard the front door burst open. "Police! Drop your weapon!" A firm voice commanded. The intruder hesitated, then bolted towards the window. With a crash, he shattered the glass and vanished into the darkness. The flashing lights of police cars filled the room, and officers quickly secured the house. Sarah and Emily were shaken but unharmed. As I held them close, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Our safe haven had been violated, but together we had survived. The shadows of that night would forever remind us of the fragility of our safety. In the aftermath, we learned that the intruders were part of a local gang targeting affluent neighborhoods. They had detailed information about many families, likely obtained through surveillance and hacking. The experience left us scarred, but it also made us more vigilant and protective of each other. We installed a state-of-the-art security system, and I never let a night go by without checking the locks multiple times. The shadows in our home that night were a stark reminder that safety is never guaranteed, but together we faced our fears and emerged stronger. The figure stood motionless in the middle of the road, illuminated only by the dim glow of my headlights. As I slammed on the brakes, the car skidded to a halt, and I could see the chilling details of his face, a gaunt, pale visage with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me. He began to move closer, and an icy dread settled in my chest. The fog swirled around him, creating an almost supernatural aura, and I knew in that moment that this was no ordinary encounter. It was a late October night, and I was driving alone on the I-95, returning from a business trip in South Carolina. The highway was eerily deserted, with only the occasional flicker of headlights from distant vehicles. The rhythmic hum of my tires against the asphalt was the only sound accompanying me. I had been driving for hours and was desperate to find a rest stop. The green signs along the road promised a pilot travel center just a few miles ahead. As I approached the travel center, the fog began to roll in, thickening with every mile. The once clear road was now shrouded in a ghostly mist, making visibility a challenge. I slowed down, squinting to make out the faint outlines of the buildings ahead. Pulling into the dimly lit parking lot, I felt a strange unease. There were only a few trucks parked, the drivers likely sleeping. I parked my car near the entrance and headed inside, hoping to grab a coffee and stretch my legs. The interior was brightly lit but eerily empty. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with a tired expression, gave me a nod as I approached the coffee machine. As I poured my coffee, I heard the door chime behind me. Turning around, I saw a man enter, his eyes scanning the room before settling on me. He was tall and thin, with an unsettling presence. He approached the counter, asking the cashier for directions to south of the border, a famous rest stop and tourist attraction. His voice was low and gravelly, sending a shiver down my spine. I paid for my coffee and quickly exited the store, feeling his gaze follow me. As I reached my car, I glanced back and saw him standing at the entrance, staring directly at me. I fumbled with my keys, my heart racing, and finally managed to unlock the door. I got in and locked the doors, taking a moment to steady my breathing. The fog outside seemed thicker now, almost alive. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, eager to put distance between myself and the unsettling man. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to just a few feet ahead. I drove cautiously, the unease growing with every passing minute. Suddenly, out of the mist, the same figure appeared, standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just inches from him. My heart pounded in my chest as he slowly approached the driver's side window. He leaned in, his hollow eyes meeting mine through the glass. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he whispered, his voice barely audible but sending a chill down my spine. The air inside the car grew colder, and a sense of impending doom washed over me. Before I could react, he disappeared into the fog. I was left sitting in my car, breathless and terrified, with the feeling that I was being watched. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own rapid breathing. I floored the gas pedal, desperate to get away. The road stretched endlessly before me, the fog swallowing everything behind. It wasn't until I saw the lights of a bustling truck stop that I began to feel safe. I pulled in, parking my car among the other vehicles, and made my way inside. The brightly lit diner was a stark contrast to the dark, foggy road. I found a seat by the window and ordered a meal, trying to shake off the fear. As I looked out into the night, I couldn't help but feel that the encounter was more than just a figment of my imagination. The man's words echoed in my mind, and I knew I would never drive that stretch of I-95 alone at night again. The final twist lingered. What if he was still out there, watching, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler? The mall was eerily silent as I made my rounds, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long, unsettling shadows. Just as I turned a corner near the food court, I saw a figure standing at the end of the corridor. He was motionless, his face obscured by the darkness. An unnatural chill crept down my spine as he slowly raised a hand and beckoned me forward. Working as a night security guard at the Westfield Century City Mall in Los Angeles wasn't the most exciting job, but it paid the bills. The mall, bustling during the day, transformed into a cavernous, echoing shell at night. I had been on the job for 6 months, and nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened until that night. It was a chilly November evening, and the mall was more deserted than usual. My shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m., giving me plenty of time to patrol the expansive halls and ensure everything was secure. As I started my patrol, the familiar sounds of my footsteps echoed through the empty corridors. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I checked the entrances, the stores, and the food court. Everything was as it should be. Around 2 a.m., I decided to take a break and have a cup of coffee in the security office. The silence of the mall was almost oppressive, and the only sound was the distant hum of the air conditioning. Suddenly, the security monitors flickered, and the feed from the camera near the toy store showed a brief glimpse of movement. I frowned and leaned closer, trying to make out what it was. The screen flickered again, but this time there was nothing. I chalked it up to a technical glitch and decided to check it out in person. As I walked toward the toy store, the feeling of unease grew. The mall seemed darker than usual, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. When I reached the toy store, I shone my flashlight around but saw nothing unusual. The toys, however, seemed to be positioned differently than I remembered. Dismissing it as my imagination, I continued my patrol. At around 4 a.m., the mall was deathly quiet. I was in the electronics section when I heard a faint sound behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. I resumed walking, but the sound came again, this time louder, a soft, shuffling noise. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. As I rounded a corner, I saw him again, the figure from the food court. He was standing in the middle of the corridor, facing me. His features were still obscured by the darkness, but I could see his eyes, glinting menacingly in the dim light. He didn't move, didn't say a word, just stood there, staring. I took a hesitant step forward. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice echoing off the walls. He didn't respond. Instead, he raised a hand and pointed towards the security office. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Summoning my courage, I turned and ran back towards the office. The monitors were all flickering when I burst into the security office. I quickly locked the door and scanned the screens. To my horror, I saw the figure on multiple feeds, moving closer and closer to the office. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone to call for backup. Just as I dialed, the monitors went black, plunging the room into darkness. I could hear footsteps outside the door, slow and deliberate. The doorknob rattled, and I backed away, pressing myself against the far wall. The door creaked open, and the figure stepped inside, his face finally visible, pale, with hollow, lifeless eyes. He spoke in a whisper that seemed to pierce the silence. "You shouldn't be here." Before I could react, everything went black. I woke up hours later, slumped in a chair in the security office. The sun was rising, and the mall was beginning to stir with the morning staff. My phone lay on the floor, dead. The monitors were back to normal, showing the usual scenes. I stumbled out of the office, my mind racing. Was it a dream? A hallucination? As I left the mall, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I never returned to that job again. My heart raced as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The black car was still there, its headlights piercing through the night like malevolent eyes. I could barely breathe as I swerved onto the narrow, winding road leading deeper into the forest. The sinister glow of the moon barely illuminated the path ahead. I knew I had to lose them before it was too late. The engine roared in defiance as I pushed the pedal to the floor, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. The terror of what lay behind me was nothing compared to the unknown that awaited me ahead. It was supposed to be a routine drive home. I had just finished a late shift at the diner, the kind where the hours drag and the only thing keeping you awake is the constant flow of coffee. My name is Sarah, and I live in a small town on the edge of a sprawling forest. The road home is long and lonely, flanked by thick trees that seem to swallow the light. Tonight, however, there was something different in the air. An uneasy feeling settled over me as soon as I left the diner parking lot. The familiar sounds of crickets and rustling leaves felt ominous rather than comforting. As I drove, the sky grew darker, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. The headlights of my car cut through the darkness, revealing the winding road ahead. The isolation of the forest always made me a little uneasy, but tonight that feeling was magnified. I turned up the radio to drown out my thoughts, but the static only made the silence more profound. It was then that I noticed a pair of headlights behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. People traveled this road all the time. But as the minutes ticked by, the car remained stubbornly on my tail, matching every turn and speed adjustment I made. A chill crept up my spine. I decided to test my theory and slowed down, almost to a crawl. The car did the same. My pulse quickened. Panic began to set in as I realized this was no coincidence. Someone was following me, and they had no intention of letting me go. I turned on my signal and took a random left turn onto a less traveled road. The car followed. My breath hitched as I fumbled for my phone, intending to call the police, but there was no signal this deep into the forest. My options were limited. The car behind me flashed its high beams, blinding me momentarily. My heart pounded in my chest. Why were they following me? What did they want? The narrow road twisted and turned, the trees closing in on either side. My only hope was to reach the old ranger station up ahead. It had been abandoned for years, but it was my best chance to lose my pursuer. The car behind me accelerated, closing the distance between us. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel tighter, focusing on the road ahead. The darkness was oppressive, the trees seeming to reach out like sinister hands ready to pull me into the void. I could see the faint outline of the ranger station through the trees. My only hope was to make it there and hide. Suddenly, the car behind me rammed into my bumper, sending a jolt of fears through my body. I fought to keep control of the car, my tires screeching as I veered off the road and into the dirt path leading to the station. The black car followed relentlessly, its headlights illuminating the old building like a spotlight on a stage. I reached the station and jumped out of the car, sprinting towards the old wooden structure. The air was cold, and the ground was uneven under my feet. I could hear the other car's engine roar as it stopped abruptly. I didn't look back. I threw myself through the door of the ranger station, slamming it shut behind me. The darkness inside was suffocating, but I had no choice. I crouched behind an old, overturned desk, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I heard the car door open and heavy footsteps approaching. The door to the station creaked open, and a beam of light swept across the room. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. The light moved slowly, methodically, as if searching for something or someone. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it would give me away. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic. Then, a sudden noise outside drew their attention. The beam of light swung away, and the footsteps retreated. I waited, scarcely daring to breathe, until I heard the car's engine start and drive away. Relief washed over me, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I needed to get back to my car and find help. As I stumbled back to the road, I realized how close I had come to something terrible. The terror of that night would stay with me forever, a reminder of how quickly things can turn from mundane to nightmarish. I got into my car and drove away, never looking back. But even now, I can still feel the cold grip of fear, wondering if they'll ever come back. I felt watched, even when I was alone. The night was dark, shadows dancing under the streetlights. A disturbing sound echoed through the park, making every hair on the back of my neck stand up. I knew he was out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. My heart pounded as the footsteps behind me grew louder. What would I do if he caught up to me? This wasn't our first encounter, and I feared it wouldn't be the last. My name is Lisa, a freelance writer living in Sao Paulo. I moved here a year ago for a fresh start, leaving behind the suffocating familiarity of my hometown. I spent my days working from cozy cafes and evenings jogging in the Parque Ibirapura, my sanctuary amidst the urban chaos. The park, with its winding paths and serene atmosphere, became a refuge. It was during one of these evening runs that I first noticed him. At first, it seemed like a coincidence, his presence just another part of the bustling park. But soon, the pattern became impossible to ignore. He was always there, lingering just out of sight, watching. Weeks passed, and his presence grew more unsettling. He wasn't just watching anymore, he was following me. It started with subtle hints, a reflection in a store window, a figure in my peripheral vision, the constant feeling of being observed. One evening, as I sat in my favorite cafe, I received a message on my phone. It was an anonymous number. "You look beautiful in that blue sweater." My blood ran cold. I glanced around, but everyone seemed busy with their own lives. Was he here, watching me right now? The messages became more frequent, each more invasive than the last. "How was your run today? Did you enjoy your coffee?" He knew my routine, my favorite spots, even my friends' names. The police dismissed my concerns, calling it a harmless prank. But I knew better. His knowledge of my life was too intimate, too precise. I started changing my routes, avoiding familiar places, but he always found me. One night, after a particularly stressful day, I decided to confront him. It was a chilly evening, the park almost deserted. I felt his eyes on me as soon as I entered. My heart pounded as I turned corners, trying to catch a glimpse of him. Then, near the old oak tree, I saw him. He was tall, with a hood pulled low over his face. I approached, my hands trembling. "Why are you following me?" I demanded. He didn't respond, just stood there, silent and menacing. As I took a step closer, he finally spoke. "You shouldn't have come here alone, Lisa." His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it sent a chill down my spine. Before I could react, he lunged. I stumbled back, tripping over roots and falling hard onto the ground. Pain shot through my ankle as he loomed over me, his shadow swallowing me whole. Desperation fueled my strength, and I grabbed a rock, striking him with all my might. He grunted, momentarily stunned, giving me a chance to scramble to my feet and run. My breath was ragged, my vision blurred with tears. The park's once comforting paths now twisted into a labyrinth of terror. I could hear his footsteps behind me, relentless. Just as I thought I couldn't go on, I saw the park's exit, a beacon of hope. Summoning every ounce of strength, I sprinted towards it, bursting into the safety of the street lights. I turned back, expecting to see him, but he was gone, vanished into the night. The police took my story more seriously this time, but they never found him. I moved to a new apartment, changed my routines, and avoided the park. The messages stopped, but the fear remained. I often wonder who he was and why he chose me. The city, once my refuge, became a place of shadows and whispers. Each night, I double-check my locks and leave the lights on, haunted by the memory of his voice and the darkness of that night. As I sit here sharing my story, I urge you all to stay vigilant. Trust your instincts, and don't let fear silence you. If you ever feel like you're being watched, don't ignore it. Stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who hide in plain sight. Like the story? Hit like and subscribe. See you in the next story popping up on your screen at this exact moment.